Good morning, Year 8. Thank you for engaging with our online lessons again. Could you please send me that message on showing my homework so I can mark you down the register? And today's lesson is going to be self-assessed. So if you are sending work into me on show my homework, please make sure you've marked it yourself. Then I can give you feedback on any errors that you've made and help you out that way. Again, please, if you can save red@theroyal.school for help emails and then show my homework just for work submissions, that would be fantastic. So today we're having a look at fractions, decimals and percentages. So developing students are going to be able to order decimals. Remember, we did that in a previous lesson, so you could look back over the previous work if you needed to in the videos there. Secure students are going to be able to recognise equivalent fractions, decimals and percentages, and then excelling students are going to be able to calculate the equivalent fractions, decimals and percentages. On to our starter then. I've got 3 main questions here in a challenge question, and I'd like to put those decimals in ascending order from smallest to largest, that means. So if you are unsure about this, you could skip back to one of the videos earlier on in our online learning sessions, and I've got a video there on ordering decimals. I might have adding decimals as well if you need to check back on that. So pause the video until we've had a go at the questions. And if you're ready to run through the answers to these, you see as follows. So if you could self-mark your work on that. If you were doing the first question, then just remember that you might want to make every number have 2 decimal places, so that you could change perhaps that third one here into 0.60 and this one into 0.30, and that way you could then match up the numbers and order them that way. Or that other method of ordering those decimals is to make sure that you look at each place value in turn. So we'd have a look, say that all of our numbers start off with a first digit of a 0. So in that sense, we can't tell which one is the smallest. So we then look at the first decimal place. This one has a 6, this one has a 0, this one has a 6, this one has a 3, this one has a 3 as well. So obviously the one with a 0 then is our smallest number, and we could work our way up that way. And if you're doing the challenge question, then you'd need to change all of your numbers into the same unit here. So you might want to go all into millimeters or all into centimeters. It doesn't really matter which you choose, as long as you then rewrite your numbers back in their original form. So you might have turned your 7 centimeters at the end here into 70 millimeters, but then we'd use 7 centimeters back again once we recognize that it's the smallest one. Now, today then we're going to look at fractions and decimals and percentages together. So we need to be able to convert between them. So I'm going to show you a little loop of how we can convert between these, and you may well be able to reverse some of this loop if need be, but we can always follow this method. So if we're going to turn a fraction into a decimal, we do a division, because remember, a fraction actually represents a division. If you're going to turn a decimal into a percentage, you times by 100, and then if you're going to turn a percentage into a fraction, then you put the percentage over 100 and then simplify the fraction that you're left with. That's the process that we follow. So you might want to get a little note down of this loop. I'm going to do some numerical examples of that in just a second before we get into some multiple choice questions for you. So if we started off with 2/5 here in blue, then we can see that if we're going to turn that into a decimal, if we go clockwise around this loop, to turn that into a decimal, we need to do a division. So remember, 2/5 as the fraction means that we're actually trying to do 2 divided by 5. So if you were to do that as the bus stop method, or if you were to do that on a calculator, you'd then end up with 0.4. Now, to turn that decimal into a percentage, then we'd need to times it by 100. Remember, 100 here has 2 zeros, so we're going to move our decimal point twice on that number. So once would get us 4, and then twice would get us 40. So this turns into 40%. And then to turn that percentage back into a fraction, we're going to put that percentage over 100 and simplify. So the percentage was 40, so we do 40 over 100, and then we need to cancel down that fraction as much as we could. So we can see here we can divide both numbers by 10, and that gives us 4/10. Then we can divide both numbers by 2, and that gives us our 2/5 again as our fully simplified fraction. That's the process we're going to then follow to change between these. Now, if you were looking at the higher end of this, you could work some of these in reverse. So if you wanted to turn a fraction into a percentage, you'd need to use equivalent fractions to get that denominator out of 100. So we might times top and bottom here by 20 of our original fraction, and that'd get us 40 hundredths, therefore 40%. And to turn our percentage into a decimal, then we'd actually divide by 100. To turn our decimal into a fraction, again, you need to use a little bit of place value in this case. So if you're looking at the decimal here of 0.4, we'd need to recognise that the 4 there represents 4/10. So we could write it as a fraction, 4/10, and then simplify that fraction back down to 2/5. But if in doubt, work clockwise around this, and if you've got the notes to support that, that'll work perfectly for you. So activity 1. You've got some trios, so there's 3 things to match together of equivalent fractions, decimals and percentages. These are some really key ones that we should know. So if you do need to work them out, that's absolutely fine, but we're going to need to get to a point at some point this year where we need to know these fractions, decimals and percentage equivalents off by heart. So if you can match the 3 together, for example, we might want to match the half. We should know that's 0.5, and we should know that is 50% as equivalents, so we'd match those 3 together. So if you've got the opportunity to print this off, you could print and cut them out, or the easier way is just to write down the 3 that match together. So we'll pause the video until you've had a go at this activity 1, and let's run through the answers to this then. So these are the ones that you should have. If you haven't fully completed this activity, or you've got some corrections to make, please make sure that those are in your notes. As I say, these are really important ones to know, and we'll be looking at this next lesson as well. It'll be really important to know these, so learn these if you can. So our loop then, and we should have a note of this in our books. To go from our fractions to decimals, we did some division. To go from our decimals to percentages, we times by 100. And to go from our percentages to fractions, this is a little bit more complicated. We wrote our percentage over 100, but then simplified the fraction. We saw that with our 2/5. 2 divided by 5 to get the decimal, 0.4 times 100 to get the decimal into a percentage, and then 40 over 100, but simplify that to get back to our 2/5. So we're now going to have a go at quite a few multiple choice questions. So you'll need to pause the video once the question's been read out, have a go at the questions, and then we'll reveal the answers. So first one, convert the following to a percentage, 0.48. Again, pause the video until you've had a go at this. And the answer then should be D, 48%. We times that number by 100 to turn it into a percentage. So move the decimal place twice, and we get 48%. So convert the following to a decimal, 24%. So if you're ready for the answer there, this one we were working in reverse then. To go from a decimal to a percentage, we times by 100. So to go from a percentage to a decimal, we divide by 100. So that's going to give us 0.24. So now convert the following to a fraction in its simplest form. So pause until you're ready for answers. So here we're going to end up with 21 over 25. Now the process here that we should actually have, there's a few answers that we'll actually see along the way. So our first step of getting our percentage into a fraction is to write that percentage over 100. So we'll actually start off with A, and that would be the point that we begin with on our working out. We could then half both of our numbers, and that would actually give us the fraction for B. But that isn't our simplest form here. Remember, always go to the simplest form you can with fractions. We could half our numbers from fraction B again, and that gets us our 21 over 25, which is our answer for C. So can we convert the following then to a decimal? So 7 over 8. So pause until you're ready for the answer. And here we should have answer B. I do see a lot of people writing things like answer C when we look at fractions, they just take the numbers from the fraction straight away, don't actually do any division, just try and write the numbers with a decimal point in between. Remember, 7/8 means that something's been cut into 8 pieces and we've got 7 of them, so we don't have a whole one here, so we can't have anything over a whole one. So this 7 point something definitely shouldn't be any answer, and this 87 point something definitely shouldn't be our answer. So we're definitely looking at 0 point something because we don't have a whole one. But you then need to do the division either on a calculator or with some long division to get your answer here. We should have this 0.875. So next one, can we convert the following to a percentage 4/5? So pause until you're ready for the answers. And answers here. Now, if we were going to follow our loop, we could do this in 2 steps. We could do 4 divided by 5 to turn it into a decimal, which is 0.8, and then times by 100 to get our decimal to a percentage, which gives us our 80%. The other method was going to be then we could use our equivalent fractions and get this fraction out of 100, because remember percentages are out of 100. And to do that we'd need to times our bottom number by 20. That's how we turn that bottom number into 100. And then if we're dealing with equivalent fractions, of course need to times the top number by 20 as well. That gives us 40 times 20 is going to give us 80 over 100. And then, of course, that's going to be 80% for our answer C. So, convert the following to a fraction in its simplest form, 0.08. And pause the video if you're ready for the answer. So here again, we could do this in 2 steps if we were going to follow our original route clockwise. So we'd turn our decimal into a percentage first, so we'd times it by 100, that gives us 8%. And then we'd write that fraction with our percentage at the top of it over 100, so that would be 8 over 100, which gives B. But of course that's not our simplest form here, so this won't be our final answer. 8 over 100, we could halve both of our numbers and give us 4 over 50, and we could halve both the numbers again and that gives us 2 over 25. So actually D is our final answer for this one. The other method of doing this would be to use our place value. We've got 0 units, we've got 0 tenths, and we've got 8 hundredths here in this fraction. So we could write it straight away as our, if my mouse will allow me, apologies for that, write it straight away as our 8 over 100, and then simplify that to give us our 2/25. But of course, working our way around our fraction decimal percentage loop clockwise always works for this. So I'd like you to decide how confident you were with those multiple choice questions. Now we're then going to write red, amber or green, and then we're going to complete the corresponding activity 2. Remember, you don't need to do all 3 activities, only the red or the amber or the green. Red is if you're not feeling very confident and it will have lots of support for you. Amber will have a few hints if you're feeling fairly confident with it, and green leaves you to your own devices with it because it's for people that are very confident with 0 help. So again, if you'd like to pause the video until you've completed that activity and are ready for the answers. So answers coming up. So if you could please make sure that you self-mark here, and we've also got a couple of little quirks with our answers here that are worth raising ready for the next lesson. We've got some numbers that are recurring, so if you were doing the last but one question and one you had your answer, if you pop this on a calculator at 0.81666666666, well that 6 carries on going as recurring. Let me show that with a little dot above the 6 to save having to write out loads and loads of those numbers. And the same with our 2/3, we're going to end up with 0.6 recurring, so put a dot over the 6 to show that it's recurring. And that will need to carry through for your decimal numbers as well. For later questions that we'll see in upcoming lessons, try not to round that number. It'd be very easy to say that our last question was 0.7 when it's rounded, but that doesn't reflect it very accurately, so try and leave that recurring in. So thank you for engaging with the online lesson. Again, if you've not yet sent me that message on show my homework, then please do so I can see who's accessed the lesson. And then today, again, it should have been self-assessed, so if you're sending any work into me, then please make sure you've marked it yourself, and then I can give you just some help on the ones that you do need support with. Thank you very much. I'll speak to you later on in the week.